might get a PTSD when I think about that project because that was an absolute nightmare, but it was also a starting point for me to develop my own module management system. So how it started, what was the road to chaos, that it was hard to manage all the modules, and it was back in Magento 1 days, all the merchants required for us to pass the license and the ownership of the code. Now, that's a pretty normal thing to do in the contract, right? But what to do if you have like 100 projects and each of them need to have the same modules? So we were not allowed to copy any of our code. And as a good agency, we didn't. So every single project we started, we had to start our modules from scratch. Now, you probably might think that was kind of a waste of time. Yeah, obviously, well, just keep it to yourself. We did copy some of the code. But we always made features unique. We always changed the namespace of the modules, so the modules were actually unique for the merchants, but it has led us to many challenges. One of them was we have the same modules in multiple versions, in multiple projects, and that's, appcode local, that's from Magento 1. So it kind of looked like this. Now imagine running 50 projects, Magento 1 projects with homepage slider, advanced homepage slider, homepage slider revolution, or home slides, and so on and so on. So it led to the second challenge because at some point, my team was not being able to tell, even though we tracked everything with GitHub, with module versioning and everything, it led to errors, right? We couldn't even at some point be able to tell which module is the actual one we should use in every project. And it led to poor management, bad quality assurance, causing a lot of bugs. So it basically led to a whole lot of frustration within the team, but also among the merchants, because sometimes we make mistakes, so it may happen somewhere in the past, it was like 10 or 12 years ago, when I actually pushed the old code to the merchant. He was like, hey, I had this feature, I don't have it anywhere, what happened? Well, it was human error. It was basically of the poor module management we had within, well, back then it was Q Software, then Q Solution Studio, then Qoliber, so there was a lot of name changing in the company, but we are sticking with this one. So, Magento 2 happened, and it came with Composer. Now, getting back to Magento 1 for a moment, there was Modman available for a while to manage modules through, let's say, Git repositories. But due to some changes in Magento 1 core regarding the symlinks, you were actually had some troubles using it in production on the other environments, so it was not as efficient as it should be for Magento 1 days. So, but with Magento 2, we had a lot of problems. Even though Composer is an amazing package manager, it actually is one of the best package managers for the software you can use. I think it's even better than the Node.js package manager. So let me tell you how we run into some issues and how we overcome them using some solutions. So the solution we kind of worked for a while, and this is how we kind of solved it on a legal way. When a merchant signs with us, there's an extra point in the contract. Now, I'm not going to get into all the legal things, but if a module is in the namespace Qoliber, it means that the merchant is basically given a free lifetime license for the module we have. So for example, let's say we have like a homepage slider module, and the merchants decide to use that module for their website. They are given a free license. Now, the whole contract legal thing is much more longer, but that's how we do it, so we don't have issues with the ownership of our code. So we used, with the modules, we used tags, we had proper versioning systems, but some of the merchants still required custom code. But everything here was managed through private repositories. So if you are familiar with the Composer JSON file, imagine you have 200 modules, so you have 200 entries in the Composer JSON file for each single repository. And that led me to a project I call a Meteor Strike. Because I was a consultant for a really large project. It had 40 developers working on Magento Store. Now, obviously that's too much. I think 40 developers for Magento Store, it's like way, way more than it should be needed. But I'll tell you why this many developers were needed in that project. And that's why I have this like subtitle here that the partially implemented IDS may lead to destruction, people being burned out, feeling burnout working in that project. So this was this project architecture. So it was over 200 modules. Each of them was in its own Bitbucket repository and a private repository. There was over, I think the exact number was 87,000 tags for each module. And there had 20 developers, 40 people in total because we also had testers, project managers, architects, and everything. So, let's play a game. You have 200 modules, each of them in its own Bitbucket private repository. So each time a developer had to work or update a feature or fix a bug, he had to run the composer update to push the changes to the main repository of the project. So we had 200 repositories for every single module, and 3 repositories for the project instance with unique modules that those 200 modules were shared. So let's play some numbers. Guess how long it did take for a composer update to take. Well, I can tell you one thing. I fixed it to 20 minutes, but guess how long I waited when I actually had to develop a small feature in that project? How long did I just look at the screen and look at Composer updating all the tags, all the branches, all the things in the Composer branch? So, guess the number. It's more than that. Well, we had 180 on the slides. So, it actually took 3 hours plus 37 minutes. So, I finished my feature, which took me 15 minutes to finish, and I was waiting 3 hours, 47 minutes just for the main project repository to update. Because the Composer, I'm not that technical in the Composer details, I don't know its core, but when you are using remote repositories via Bitbucket or GitLab, it's actually checking every single tag, every single branch in the repository. So if you have like this many modules, it will take this amount of time. And I was able to narrow it down to 20 minutes just by creating a bash script using generative AI that removed all the branches that were merged to the master branch in all the modules and removed all the tags that I was just leaving like the last 20 ones just in case we need to get back to the old version of the module. So, but it was still way too long. So I quit that project, even though I would have to say it was really, really profitable project for me because I was an architect there. So I said to myself, I need to do this right. Because I decided to rebrand the whole company to Qoliber, and everything that we do had to be like really top quality in terms of module management, code quality, and everything. So that's what we did, and that was my motto. If I do the module management right for everything we do, or I don't do it at all. But if we stick to things what we have, we will run into the same issue that with this project Meteor, right? So in the end, my team will be frustrated because they have to wait and look at the screen, not doing anything possible, because you cannot run or develop new features while your Composer update is being run. Well, some of the developers actually had 4 laptops and had 4 project instances. So you actually finish one feature, then move to the other laptop, finish second feature, and to the third laptop, and fourth laptop to finish. So he could actually continue working during the day, not to burn time, because that's why this project has this many developers, because basically everybody was waiting for the Composer to update. So why private Packagist? And this is not a Composer presentation. I don't know how or why Composer does it, but I'll just focus on 2 things on those slides. Private Packagist is insanely fast. Once I switch a similar project to private Packagist, it takes about 30 seconds to update everything. So that's a huge difference. So those slides and everything that you see here will be in the slideshare, or I'm sorry, Google Slides. And the second reason we use the private Packagist is because it's cheap. Now, if you're an agency and you have like your own internal team of senior developers that only manage the code, manage release of the modules and everything, it only costs like 59 euros a month. So I'll be honest with you, for an agency, that is really, really small. Now, if you're like an extension vendor and you have like 1,000 customers, it still costs you €1 per customer. So if you're like growing, it might be a little expensive at some point. But if you want to use only this for your agency project, it's cheap, it's fast, and that's how we do it. And it's obviously it's secure, you got all the webhooks and everything. So what were our key principles to create this centralized module management? So this is everything I did. We had the namespaces, you probably don't know this. We had like a couple open source modules available at namespaces. That was when I was trying to figure out the new brand for my company. I had this initiative which I'll call eCommerce Nanobots. That's what this like 8-bit logo is about. It had like 17 open source modules which are moving back to Qoliber namespace, so we have everything in one place. So it was a challenge because we had open source repositories on GitHub. We have our own private and paid modules on GitLab, so we can share the access to our partners. And we have our internal modules on Bitbucket repository. We will move from Bitbucket to GitLab eventually, so only 2 of those repository sources available. Bitbucket will be used as a backup. So it is a challenge because we also wanted to be sure that our code is testable, so we won't run into any technical debt. And you heard Joshua how technical debt might be a problem in the for the project long time live. Sorry, I missed the word. So I wanted to be sure that everything we do before we release any version of the module, it has to go through the PHP stan. And we are using the 8th level of PHP stan, which is like the most strict way of controlling the code quality. So every single code comment, every single return type must be exactly as it is. And it allows us to actually catch a lot of bugs and issues, even if the modules that we developed many years ago. We got mess detector, code sniffer, and PHP unit to run some unit tests. But we don't run Magento unit tests. We just create unit tests when we need, and we know they are valuable. So the next step would be to create all the modules which are compatible with Huva and Elasticsearch, so we don't jeopardize performance, and we keep with the latest standards. And I'm happy to share, you can see the gold badges. We were able to achieve it in half a year, since we started as Qoliber in April last year. So how was the implementation, how we actually completed this module management? So it actually were with multiple phases. Now, okay, we still got enough time. So the first phase was very similar to the way Magento works. We put everything through the app code and created a small package deployer, which is a fancy name for a bash script that is able to check the changes, clone the repositories, and push the modules to each own unique repositories. And we manage that through Bitbucket. But the problem is that with this phase 1, we would probably run into the same issue that we had with which I had with this project Meteor that was causing, well, I'll be honest, a huge PTSD. It has its pros and cons. The main problem with this phase 1 approach was once we start developing open source modules, once we start moving our open source module to our own namespace, if we keep everything in the app code, it will be hard for us to accept pull requests from the community and merge them to our open source modules. Because we keep everything in one large repository and just push the changes to mainstream. So it will be hard, well, not hard, but it will be challenging and time consuming to fetch the changes from the community to push them to open source modules. And we kind of ran into some conflicts in the code. And we had like one huge large repository, which I kind of didn't like, so we need to find a better way. So we moved to phase 3. Now, you probably wonder why the phase 2 is not here. That's because I'm too ashamed to say what was the phase 2. So let's just proceed with the phase 3. So we actually started using Git sub modules in order to manage everything we do. So we stuck with the app code as it is, but not a single module is actually in the app code as a part of the main repository. So we have like the main repository, kind of like Magento, but all the modules within the app code are Git sub modules, which are basically added, as you can see here. This is one of the open source module optional terms and conditions. And we specify this. So every single module that we do, private, open source, or direct for the merchants, or in their internal project, we specify the source in the composer JSON. So our package deployer can determine where to push the code, where to push the changes, or how to update the module. So it's pretty neat thing to do. So once our main project repository, which has all the sub-modules installed and all the sub-modules configured, it's just like I said, it's one Magento instance. So we connected Bitbucket pipelines in order to hook the package deployer, but also be able to clone the repository. Basically, it's a whole pipeline to set up Magento project. Like a regular deployment, like a continuous delivery thing. So anything we change, we merge, or we create a pull request, we run a pipeline and go through every single step of delivering Magento project. So like a full, complete deployment. But we added 2 things that you can see on the slides. We added code test, which I said are the static analysis of the code. And only if the code tests, we create the packages for each single module. So non-tested code, it's impossible to get to any of the module sub-repositories. And it works pretty well. So how it's actually, like I said, we got this package deployer. Again, that's a fancy name for just a really large bash script. So what it does, it's basically cloning the main repository, then it's initializing all the Git submodules, and it's like a for each loop. So for every module in the app code, we check the module source URL in the composer.json of that module's file. We clone that module to a separate repository, and we push the changes to the main repository from that module branch. Now, wasn't that too complex? So basically, it clones the module sub-repositories, checks the branches, check everything, and it does all the job for us. So I hope I didn't misspoke anything here, but you get the idea, right? So, and the package deployer does a simple thing. Based on the composer.json content, it either pushes the modules to the GitHub repository, it pushes the module to the Bitbucket repository, and it pushes the module to the GitLab. It all depends on the sub-module composer.json content. And it basically using the Bitbucket pipelines look like this. So everything that you saw in that little piece of the YAML file is done this way. So there's like an additional step, which we renamed to like create Qoliber packages. So it manages everything we do. So open source modules, private modules, and paid extensions that we released in October last year. And the GitHub is responsible to manage and be connected to the packagist.org, which are the public packages at Composer. And Bitbucket and GitLab is being pushed to the private packages, and private packages manages all those. Well, it's a public and private packages, right? So each of those packages manages, checks if the module was updated, updates the version of the module, updates the content of the module. So it's fully automatic. It really, really works well. And there's only one downside to this solution. We will probably, but the downside so far is on purpose. So we have to trigger the deployment manually. So the main deployment triggers manually. When we create a pull request, we actually get a notification that we need to start the deployment. We will automate it, but we need to spend a little more time to actually master everything we do. But it is actually up to phase 4 why we want to do it. So this approach, using Git submodules, using the proper structure of composer.json and with the package deployer, allowed us to control all the modules we develop at Qoliber. And right now it's over 300 modules that we can basically share, install with a simple composer command to any project that we run at Qoliber. And it has really, really streamlined the process. Nobody's frustrated anymore. It's fully automatic. So, but we don't want to stop there. We want to be sure that we have it even connected with something much more advanced, which will be integration testing, but we will not be using integration testing that Magento offers. We want to go with the Playwright. And I think that Algentos from Netherlands, they actually released a complete set of the integration tests for Playwright, for Magento, for the Luma and Huva theme. So we'll probably utilize it and write our own set of tests for everything that we did. So we'll be using GitLab and GitHub Actions, which will trigger the deployment pipeline, or maybe a GitLab pipeline, because like I mentioned, I would like to reduce one step here. So we'll probably run everything through GitLab and GitLab Actions. Bitbucket will be just a backup. Then it will trigger the package deployer, which will trigger all the tests to run all the modules. So all the integration tests, and all the static analysis of the code. And if we need to test anything more, we'll probably just hook it. So the package deployer, once all the tests are completed, will just push changes to private or public package repository. So that's it, guys. We've done it in 21 minutes, so we have 5 minutes for questions. So thank you very much for listening. I hope I didn't get anyone confused with talking too fast. So thank you.
Questions?
I'm sorry if you already mentioned this in the beginning because I was a little late. But why do you use 3 Git hosted services? Why not just put everything on GitHub?
Because a while ago we developed a lot of internal modules or internal tools. For example, we have like a lot of add-ons to MageRun, and we had them at Bitbucket, so we just stick with them at Bitbucket. But I've mentioned we will probably moving everything to GitLab.
Yeah.
So we only have GitHub for the public open source modules, and GitLab for everything internal and all the paid modules that we offer as Qoliber. And Bitbucket will be moved just as a backup, because GitLab we host it ourselves. And, server might go down, something might go wrong. So we'll probably, as I said, Bitbucket will be used eventually as a backup.
Thank you.
Hello. Will other agencies be able to make use of it? I mean, are you going to open source this part as well?
Maybe eventually, like I mentioned, the package deployer is just a fancy bash script. So yeah, I don't see any reason why we shouldn't share it. But there are plenty of other stuff we want to share in the upcoming weeks with a huge update to the MageScan as well. So this would probably have to wait. And probably a lot of refactoring would be needed because, we're Magento developers, not bash scripters.
I have a question. Can you explain a little bit more about how you set up an e-commerce instance, right? Magento instance. Let's say if you have some sort of a reusable components, right? Some sort of app code modules, right? Are you recommending an app code modules to be in composerized modules, or you want to keep it in app code? Because we have seen lots of modules within Magento repository, especially and then we were talking about performance and tech debts and lots of things, right? So what's your recommendation? How you would approach about let's say hundreds of modules sitting in the app code?
Well, I don't mind hundreds of modules in the app code if there are merchant-specific modules and features. If you are writing a customized, huge e-commerce website, I don't mind this being in the app code. But that's my personal approach. Because for large projects, I use app code all the time. But if I see that the modules might be reusable in different projects, then it would be good to move it to a single repository. If you are starting, but you cannot go to the other way. Right? Because then if you start using, if you're using private packages, you should be fine. But a lot of agencies which I've talked to don't use it, don't plan to use it. So let's say if you decide to move from the app code to vendor packages installed by Composer, well, you'll be running to this 3 hours Composer update operations, and you don't want that. But my approach with the app code, it's absolutely fine for customized features for any e-commerce website. If you're, as an agency, you have a lot of modules that you share between the projects, definitely move to private packages or some other way to manage other modules. But private packages, in my opinion, it does wonders. I was really surprised how fast it is and how easy it is to install everything, because it comes with the caching, it comes with the security. So you saw it on the slides. I didn't want to quote them, but it has a lot to offer. And even for a freelancer, I don't think 60 euros a month is like a huge expense.
Continuing to the same, right? One other, when we were looking at the tech debt presentation, right? Joshua mentioned something about a composable architecture. The way that you were mentioning something about composerized modules, right? Now, moving forward, people were just moving towards segregated application, separate application, attaching an application to commerce, right? So, do you see the value of having a composer modules that very, very much in pertaining to now the industry is moving towards a composable architecture?
I do have to say that was a really long question. So I do have a small request. Could you shorten it somehow?
So basically, how do you solve the problem of managing those modules through composer-based modules if we are moving towards a composable architecture where we are not building modules, we are building applications separate from the modules? Do you see the value in managing the modules long run, or it's just a short period of time?
I think it's more of a question of an architecture, because if you can move the module to its own repository, to be a complete set of features, and it wouldn't matter if it's like Magento or a Symfony application or Laravel, then you always benefit, but the module has to be reusable, Right? With Magento, there are a lot of architects out there who for some reason don't like the app code approach. I say, love the app code. You need to love the app code. There's one more question.
Did you consider using like Packagist or something similar instead of private Packagist, which is a self-hosted one?
Yeah, I did. I did, but I decided to go with Packagist, with a private Packagist, because with Packagist you host it yourself. So let's say you have like multiple projects spread worldwide, and you have like one server. Imagine that something goes wrong. So I think that 59 euros with for a fully cloud solution that does all the caching, security, has like 99.99% of uptime. Well, like I said, it's no expense, right? Even for a freelancer, if you have multiple projects, this is something that everyone can afford, especially for an agency. So yeah, I did consider it. We actually had Packagist installed for quite some time, but I tried to do some DevOps stuff, and to be honest, I broke it.
Questions?
Okay, thank you very much, guys. Thanks for having me.